In 2003, a 91-year-old man sued the ice cream company he had founded 70 years earlier. His name was S. Presley Blake, and in 1935, with his brother Curtis, he had borrowed $547 from his parents and opened a little ice cream shop in Springfield, Massachusetts, and called it Friendly. Over the next 44 years, the two brothers built that shop into one of the largest and most beloved restaurant chains in America. Hundreds of restaurants, then eventually more than 850, a fixture of East Coast childhood, the place a whole region went for a Fribble and a Jim Dandy Sunday after Little League. And now, in his 90s, decades after selling it, Presley Blake was in court against his own creation, a shareholder suing the company he'd built because he could not stand what its owners had done to it, and he wanted it to stop. Sit with that image, because it's the whole story compressed into a single scene. The founder, in his 90s, spending millions of his own dollars, fighting the corporation that now owned his life's work because he believed the people running it were mismanaging it, betraying it, running it into the ground. He didn't need the money. He wasn't trying to get rich. He said it plainly. "I just want the future of Friendly's to be secure." A 91-year-old man going to war to protect an ice cream chain because the values he and his brother had built it on had been abandoned by everyone who came after them. He lost that fight in the way that matters. Friendly's went bankrupt in 2011 and again in 2021. It went from more than 850 restaurants at its peak to around 100 today. And the reason it fell is, at bottom, the reason Presley Blake was in that courtroom. Because Friendly's was built by two brothers who believed in quality, in fairness, and above all in staying out of debt. And then it was handed to a parade of owners who believed in none of those things, who loaded it with debt, diluted its identity, and treated an 80-year-old family institution as an asset to be squeezed. The founders built something the way you build something to last. The people who came after ran it the way you run something you plan to flip. And the distance between those two philosophies is the distance between 850 restaurants and 100. Let me take you back to the beginning, because the beginning tells you exactly what was lost. It's 1935, the Great Depression. Two young brothers in Springfield, Massachusetts, Presley Blake, 20, and Curtis Blake, 18, can't find work, like millions of others. Their mother, of all people, points them toward an opportunity. "There's this new freezer technology," she tells them. "Go read about it. Go make something of yourselves." So they borrow $547 from their parents, about $10,000 in today's money, and they open an ice cream shop. And right away, in that first decision, you see the brains of the operation. The drugstores and soda fountains around town were selling a double-dip ice cream cone for a dime. The Blake brothers sold the exact same thing, 2 scoops, for a nickel. Half the price. They undercut everyone in town on day one, betting they'd make it up on volume, on being the place everybody came to because everybody could afford it. And they were right. On that first 90-degree July evening in 1935, the line stretched about 100 feet down the sidewalk. They stayed open until midnight and sold 552 cones for a grand total of $27 and change. It was a hit from the first night. And the name was the whole philosophy in a single word. They called it Friendly. Not Blake's, not Springfield ice cream, not anything about the product. Friendly. Because the promise wasn't just good, cheap ice cream. It was that when you came in, you'd be treated warmly, welcomed, served by people who were glad you were there. The name was a promise about how you'd be made to feel. In the depths of the Depression, when people had nothing, the Blakes offered an affordable, small joy, delivered with genuine warmth. That was the entire concept, and it was a good one, and it worked because they meant it. Now here's the part that matters most for everything that comes later, the part that makes this a tragedy instead of just a business story. Presley Blake, the older brother, the shrewd one, had 2 ironclad principles that governed how he ran the company, and both of them were about discipline. The first was quality. Do it right. Use good ingredients. Make the ice cream genuinely excellent. Treat people genuinely well. The second, and this is the crucial one, was that he was fiercely, almost religiously anti-debt. Presley Blake did not believe in borrowing. He believed in efficiency, in thrift, in growing only as fast as you could afford to grow with money you actually had. For the first 5 years, the two brothers shared a single-used 1928 Ford Model A between them and rarely took a day off. They built the thing dollar by dollar, carefully, patiently, refusing to overextend, refusing to owe anyone anything they couldn't cover. That anti-debt discipline is the soul of the founding Friendlies, and I want you to hold on to it, because the entire fall of the company is the story of what happens when that one principle gets abandoned. Friendlies was built deliberately and successfully as a debt-averse company. It died decades later, buried in debt. The thing the founder feared most is the exact thing that killed his creation. Remember that. The brothers grew it the disciplined way. When customers started asking for food, not just ice cream, they added it. By 1940, they'd opened a second location and introduced the hamburger, turning the ice cream shop into something more like a diner, a full casual restaurant with ice cream at its heart. When World War II came and rationing and the draft made it impossible to run the business right, they did something almost unheard of. They closed the shops entirely and put up signs saying the locations weren't for rent because they'd be back when we win the war. They shut the whole thing down rather than run it badly or sell it off. And then they reopened in 1945 and started expanding for real. That's the character of these men. They would rather close than compromise. And expand they did, the disciplined way, for decades. By 1951, there were 10 Friendlies in Connecticut and western Massachusetts. In 1960, they moved to a new headquarters in Wilbraham, Massachusetts, and built an ice cream plant, a real manufacturing facility because Friendlies made its own ice cream. This wasn't a company that bought its product from someone else. It produced it, controlled it, owned the whole chain from the cream to the cone. By 1974, the chain had grown to 500 restaurants across the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic, and into the Midwest, with a second production plant in Ohio. The signature items became institutions. The Fribble, that super thick milkshake, originally called the Awful Awful, Awful Big Awful Good, until the marketing department presumably decided that naming your milkshake Awful wasn't ideal. The Jim Dandy Sundae, a towering thing, 60-plus flavors of ice cream, the red booths, the diner atmosphere, the whole warm family restaurant experience that a couple of generations of East Coast kids grew up inside of. And it's worth stopping to describe what a Friendlies actually meant to people, because the intensity of the nostalgia is the measure of what was lost, and it's the reason this fall stings the way it does. For a huge swath of the East Coast, across multiple generations, Friendlies was woven into the ordinary rituals of family life. It was where you went after the Little League game, the whole team piling into the booths in their dusty uniforms. It was where a kid had their first Fribble and couldn't get the thick shake up the straw and didn't care. It was the towering Jim Dandy Sundae that a grandparent would buy a grandchild as a treat too big for one person to finish. It was the after-church Sunday lunch, the reward for a good report card, the reliable middle ground for a family that wanted a real sit-down meal without the fuss or the cost of somewhere fancy. The red booths, the servers who lived up to the name, the laminated menu with the ice cream on the back. It was, for millions of people, the physical setting of some of the warmest small memories of childhood. That's not something a company earns by accident. Friendlies earned it by doing for decades exactly what the Blakes set out to do in 1935. Be genuinely good, be genuinely affordable, and be genuinely warm. The nostalgia people carry for it is the receipt for 80 years of a promise kept. For 44 years, Presley and Curtis Blake ran Friendlies, and they ran it well, and they ran it their way: quality, warmth, and no debt. By the time they were done, they had built more than 500 restaurants from a $500 loan and a used Model A. It was one of the genuine great American family business success stories. And then, in 1979, the brothers retired and they sold Friendlies. And the moment they sold it is the moment the trouble began, because everything after 1979 is the story of Friendly's passing from owner to owner to owner, none of whom were the Blakes, none of whom shared the Blakes' discipline, each of whom had their own idea of what to do with this 80-year-old institution. And the ideas kept getting worse. The first buyer was at least a serious company, Hershey, the chocolate giant. In 1979, the Blakes sold Friendly's to Hershey Foods for about $164 million, and Hershey ran it as a subsidiary. And under Hershey, Friendly's actually reached its greatest physical size. It grew to more than 800 restaurants, the most it would ever have, the absolute peak of the empire. Hershey did the natural thing and added its own candies to the sundaes, Reese's Pieces, and Heath bars folded into the ice cream, which was a reasonable fit. But even at its peak size under Hershey, the chain was starting to show strain. High labor costs and the beginnings of the intense competition that would define the decades to come. The peak of the footprint and the beginning of the pressure arrived at almost the same time. Then came 1988 and the single most damaging financial event in the company's history, the one that betrayed the founding principle most directly. A restaurant executive named Donald Smith bought Friendly's from Hershey, and he paid a fortune for it, around $375 million, more than double what Hershey had paid 9 years earlier. Most analysts at the time believed he had drastically overpaid, that he'd bought a struggling company at a wildly inflated price. And to finance that overpayment, the company took on an enormous load of debt. There it is. That's the wound. Prestley Blake built Friendly's over 44 years on a foundation of zero debt, of thrift, of never owing anything you couldn't cover. And in 1988, 9 years after he left, the company was strapped with a huge debt load to fund a purchase that most experts thought was overpriced in the first place. The exact thing the founder had spent his life avoiding was now bolted onto the company, and it would drag on Friendly's for the rest of its existence. A debt-averse company was now a debt-laden one, and once that debt was on the books, every decision afterward had to answer to it. This is the original financial sin of Friendly's fall, and it was committed by an owner buying and selling the founder's creation like a poker chip. And it's worth being precise about why debt is so corrosive to a company like this, because it's the mechanism underneath everything that follows. Debt isn't just a number on a page. It's a permanent claim on the future. Every dollar of revenue that comes in has to service the debt before it can do anything else. Before you can renovate a tired restaurant, before you can invest in the ice cream, before you can lower a price to compete, before you can weather a bad quarter. A company with no debt has options. It can absorb a downturn, sit out a bad year, spend to fix its stores, take the long view. A company loaded with debt has no room to breathe. It has to keep feeding the debt no matter what, which means it can't invest in the very things that would fix its problems, which means the problems compound, which means it needs to cut costs, which usually means cutting the quality and the service and the freshness that were the whole point. Debt turns a company that could have healed slowly into a company that has to bleed steadily. The Blakes understood this in their bones, which is exactly why they refused to borrow. They wanted the freedom that only comes from owing nothing. The 1988 deal took that freedom away and never gave it back, and everything that went wrong afterward went wrong inside the cage that debt had built. Smith made the name official, at least. He added the apostrophe "as" in 1989, turning Friendly into Friendly's, the name everyone had always called it anyway. But under Smith and the Tennessee Restaurant Company that Friendly's became part of, the deeper rot set in, and it was a rot of identity. Because here's what the new owners started doing, and it's the second great cause of the fall, running right alongside the debt. They couldn't leave the concept alone. Each new management team had a different idea of how to fix or modernize or reposition Friendly's. And those ideas kept pulling the company away from what it actually was. The clearest example, and the one that enraged the founders, was the menu. Friendly's was an ice cream and American diner comfort food place. Burgers, sandwiches, sundaes, Fribbles, simple, familiar, warm. And at some point, the owners decided that wasn't enough, and they started adding things that had no business being there. Quesadillas, fajitas, Tex-Mex food at a New England ice cream parlor. It's a smaller-scale echo of what killed Rack's roast beef. A company with a crystal-clear identity deciding to chase trends and breadth, cramming the menu with items that didn't fit until customers couldn't quite say what the place was anymore. Presley Blake himself was furious about it. This was one of the specific things that drove him toward that lawsuit. He watched the owners take the simple, beloved, focused concept he'd built and bloat it into something confused and unfocused, and it appalled him. And there's a reason menu bloat keeps showing up in these stories as a symptom of a company that's lost its way, because it's almost always a sign of the same underlying mistake. A business that has stopped believing in what it is and started chasing what it thinks people want. A confident Friendly's knows it's the ice cream and comfort food place, and it invests in being the best possible version of that. An insecure, owner-churned Friendly's looks at its declining traffic and panics, and instead of fixing the core, the aging stores, the tired service, the lost simplicity, it reaches for gimmicks, for whatever's trendy, for fajitas, hoping novelty will paper over the rot. But it never works, because you can't out-fajita your identity problem. The customers who loved Friendly's for what it was don't want quesadillas from it, and the customers who want quesadillas aren't going to a New England ice cream parlor to get them. So the menu expansion adds cost, complexity, and confusion while attracting no one, and every dollar and every square inch of attention that goes into fajitas is $1 and an inch not spent on being a great ice cream and comfort food restaurant. The bloat isn't just a bad decision. It's the visible symptom of a company that no longer knows or trusts what it is. By the time the company went public again in 1997, trading on the NASDAQ, and then through the years that followed, Friendly's had become a company that had lost the thread. The menu had swelled to something rivaling the Cheesecake Factory in sheer size and complexity, even though a small handful of items generated most of the actual sales. A classic sign of a kitchen and a brand that had lost its focus, doing far too many things when it should have been perfecting a few. Many of the restaurants themselves were aging badly, looking as old as the brand, unrenovated, tired, and crucially, locations that had been prime A real estate back in the 60s and 70s, busy malls, thriving suburban corridors, had, over the decades, aged into C locations as the malls declined and the traffic patterns shifted and the neighborhoods changed. The physical footprint of the company was decaying in place, in real estate that had gone quietly stale. This is the point where the whole industry started moving against Friendly's too, and it's worth being clear about the external forces because they were real and they were brutal. The full-service, casual dining sector exploded with competition. Applebee's, Chili's, TGI Fridays, the whole wave of casual chains, all fighting for the same family dinner dollar. And from the other direction came fast casual, the quicker, cheaper, fresher upstarts. Friendly's was caught in the middle, an aging concept in aging buildings, squeezed between the polished casual dining chains on one side and the nimble, fast casual newcomers on the other, carrying a debt load the whole time. Its ice cream, once a genuine differentiator, now faced a supermarket freezer aisle full of premium brands, Ben and Jerry's, Haagen-Dazs, and 100 others, that hadn't existed when Friendly's was young. The thing that had made it special was now available, arguably better, at every grocery store in America. Why go to a tired Friendly's for ice cream you could buy nicer at the Stop and Shop? That squeeze deserves a closer look because it's a genuinely difficult position and it wasn't entirely Friendly's fault. Think about where Friendly's sat. It wasn't cheap and fast enough to compete with fast food or the emerging fast casual places on convenience and price. It wasn't polished or exciting enough to compete with the aggressive new casual dining chains on atmosphere and buzz, and its signature product, ice cream, had been commoditized out from under it by the premium supermarket brands. It was a middle child in an industry that was punishing the middle. Too slow for the quick crowd, too plain for the night out crowd, too replaceable for the dessert crowd. This stuck-in-the-middle problem killed a lot of once great chains in the same era. And it's especially cruel because it's a trap that closes slowly. There's no single dramatic blow, just a steady erosion from every direction at once, a company that used to be the obvious choice becoming, gradually, nobody's first choice for anything. Friendly's had been beloved precisely because, for decades, it was the perfect middle option. A real meal and great ice cream, affordable and warm, better than fast food and easier than fancy. And then the middle, the exact ground it stood on, simply gave way beneath it as the industry polarized toward the fast and the cheap on one end and the polished and exciting on the other. So by the early 2000s, Friendly's was a company in real trouble. Over-diversified menu, aging restaurants, decaying real estate, brutal competition on every side, a differentiator that had been commoditized, and that debt from 1988 sitting underneath all of it. And this is when Presley Blake, watching from retirement, could not take it anymore. In 2003, he sued. As a shareholder, he'd spent some $2 million of his own money to become the company's largest individual shareholder, specifically so he'd have standing to fight. He took the company's management to court, charging that they had mismanaged funds and improperly moved company assets into another restaurant chain that the same executives were involved with. He believed the people running Friendly's were enriching themselves and neglecting or actively harming the company, and he wanted it stopped. This is an extraordinary thing. The 90-plus-year-old founder, decades after selling out, spending millions to buy his way back in as a shareholder purely so he could sue the managers he believed were destroying his creation. It's the purest possible expression of the gap between how the founders valued the company and how its owners did. To Blake, Friendly's wasn't an asset. It was his life's work, and he'd rather burn millions in legal fees than watch it be looted. The lawsuit dragged on for years, and there's a heartbreaking side note here. The fight and the stress of it all contributed to a falling out between Presley and Curtis, the two brothers who had built the whole thing together side by side, one making the ice cream while the other served the customers, now estranged in their old age, partly over the war for the company's soul. The company's fracture had reached all the way back to fracture its own founders. The lawsuit finally ended in 2007 when the dust settled in the most telling way possible. A private equity firm, Sun Capital Partners, bought Friendly's and took it private for about $340 million. Blake dropped his case, and the brothers mercifully reconciled. But the company Blake had been fighting for was now in the hands of private equity. And if you followed any of these stories, you know what that usually means. By the time Sun Capital took over, the chain was, in the words of one account, already wheezing. The new leadership found exactly what you'd expect: a bloated menu, aging stores, prime old locations that had aged into weak ones, and a casual dining landscape that had charged right past Friendly's. And under private equity ownership, carrying its debt, unable to reverse the fundamental decline, Friendly's did what wheezing, debt-laden companies do. In 2011, Friendly's filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy for the first time. It closed a big batch of underperforming stores, shed some of its obligations, and emerged in early 2012 as a much smaller company, down to around 360 restaurants, a fraction of the 850-plus peak. The empire was already less than half of what it had been. The ownership carousel just kept spinning. This is one of the most passed-around brands in American restaurant history, and the sheer number of hands it went through is itself a big part of the story, because every transfer meant another team with another strategy, another round of changes, another dilution of whatever identity was left. Follow the chain of custody. The Blakes sold to Hershey. Hershey sold to Donald Smith's Tennessee Restaurant Company, that became a public company. Then Sun Capital Partners took it private. Then it passed toward Dean Foods on the dairy side. Then eventually Amici Partners Group and Bricks Holdings. Owner after owner after owner, each one holding the beloved 80-year-old brand for a while, each one with a different plan. None of them the family that built it. None of them possessed of the founding discipline. A columnist, borrowing from a Wallace Stevens poem, called the Blakes the Emperors of Ice Cream, and described them watching as corporate rollers of big cigars burned through the caring family's business. That's exactly what it was. A warm family institution passed among cold financial owners, each taking a turn, none of them loving it. And think about what that endless churn does to the people who actually keep a restaurant chain alive. The store managers, the long-tenured servers, the franchisees, the customers. A brand needs continuity to hold its soul. The same standards enforced year after year, the same promises kept, the same sense that someone at the top actually cares whether the ice cream is good and the servers are warm. Every change of ownership resets that. A new team comes in, questions everything, changes the menu, changes the standards, changes the strategy, often lays people off, and then, a few years later, sells to the next team who does it all again. The institutional memory erodes. The people who remembered how a Friendly's was supposed to feel retire or quit or get let go. And nobody replaces that knowledge, because the owners are just passing through. After enough cycles, the company is running on brand recognition alone. The name still means something to customers, but there's no longer anyone inside who remembers or cares what the name was supposed to stand for. That's how an 80-year-old institution hollows out, not in one dramatic collapse, but through a dozen handoffs, each one carrying a little less of the original spirit than the last. By 2020, Friendly's was a shadow, a few hundred locations at most, still fighting, still trying to reinvigorate the brand under yet another CEO. And then COVID hit, and COVID was almost perfectly designed to kill a company like Friendly's. An aging, dine-in, sit-down, family restaurant concept, built entirely around people gathering in red booths for a leisurely meal and a shared sundae, at exactly the moment when gathering indoors became impossible. And the restaurants that survived were the ones built for takeout, delivery, and curbside, precisely the things a nostalgic sit-down ice cream parlor was worst at. The company cited the increased cost of commodities like cream and high rents on all those aging locations as it took the inevitable step. On November 1st, 2020, Friendly's filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy for the second time. And here the numbers tell the whole story in one brutal comparison. In 2007, Sun Capital had bought Friendly's for about $337 million. In 2021, coming out of that second bankruptcy, the entire Friendly's restaurant business was sold to Amici Partners Group for under $2 million. Under $2 million. A company that had changed hands for over $300 million just 14 years earlier was now worth less than 1% of that. And there's a detail in the bankruptcy filing that captures the sadness of it perfectly. The company noted that its outstanding unredeemed gift cards were expected to total about $1.2 million, meaning the value of gift cards people had bought and not yet used was a meaningful fraction of what the whole restaurant chain sold for. The empire had been reduced to something worth barely more than the loose change people had left on its own gift cards. Presley Blake didn't live to see that second bankruptcy in the worst way. He died in 2021 at the astonishing age of 106. His brother Curtis had died in 2019 at 102. There's a strange, lovely footnote to these men, which is that they lived almost impossibly long lives. A columnist joked that they must have slipped some magic longevity ingredient into the ice cream. The two brothers who borrowed $500 in the Depression to sell nickel cones lived between them to 208 years, long enough to watch their creation grow into a mighty empire and then be dismantled by strangers, long enough for one of them to spend his 10th decade suing to save it. Presley Blake, in his autobiography, wrote about what he wanted people to take from his life, and it wasn't about ice cream. He wrote, "The thing I want people to take away is the need for business ethics. The most important thing is honesty." That was the man. That was the company he built. And that ethic is precisely what got lost somewhere in the decades of buyouts and debt and menu bloat and asset shuffling that followed him out the door. Friendly's still exists, in a way, and it's worth being fair about the survival. There are around 100 restaurants left, mostly in the Northeast, still serving Fribbles and Jim Dandy's under yet another round of ownership trying to revive the brand, simplifying the menu back toward the classics, remodeling, chasing franchise growth, leaning on the deep nostalgia that people still feel for the place. And critically, the ice cream itself lives on separately. The Friendly's brand you buy in supermarket freezers is now handled through the dairy side, tied to Dean Foods and Dairy Farmers of America. And that ice cream is arguably healthier as a business than the restaurants ever were at the end. In an odd way, the company has split back into its two original halves, the ice cream maker and the restaurant. And the ice cream maker, the thing the Blakes started with in 1935, is the part that endured. The cones outlived the empire. There's something quietly fitting in that, and it points at a truth about the whole story. Friendly's was always, secretly, two businesses wearing one name, a manufacturer that made ice cream and a chain of restaurants that served it. The restaurants were the glamorous, visible, beloved part, the red booths and the birthday sundaes and the memories. But the manufacturing was the sturdy, unglamorous foundation underneath, the actual production of a real physical product that people would buy whether or not they ever set foot in a restaurant. And when the whole enterprise came apart under debt and competition and decades of mismanagement, it was the sturdy, unglamorous foundation that survived, while the glamorous, beloved part crumbled. The part of the company closest to what the Blakes actually started with in 1935, two brothers making good ice cream, is the part still standing. Everything the later owners built on top of it, the sprawling restaurant empire they leveraged and bloated and flipped, is the part that fell. The founders' original, small, honest thing outlasted all the grand corporate things done to it. Here's what I keep coming back to, because Friendly's fall has a specific lesson, and it's a pointed one. This was not a company killed by a bad idea. The idea was wonderful, and it worked for the better part of a century. Good ice cream and warm comfort food in a friendly family setting, an idea so sound that Friendly's wrote it from a single Depression-era shop to 850 restaurants. And it was not, at its root, killed by changing tastes or competition alone, though those absolutely hammered it at the end. At its root, Friendly's was killed by the abandonment of the exact principles it was built on. It was founded by a man who refused to take on debt, and it was destroyed by debt. It was founded by two brothers obsessed with a clear, simple quality concept, and it was diluted by owners who couldn't stop adding fajitas and complexity and confusion. It was built by people who treated it as a life's work to be tended with honesty, and it was run into the ground by a succession of owners who treated it as an asset to be leveraged, flipped, and squeezed. The founder saw it happening. That's the part that haunts me. Presley Blake didn't die in ignorance of what was being done to his creation. He watched it, in real time, into his 90s, and he understood exactly what was wrong, and he spent millions of his own dollars and years of his extraordinarily long life trying to stop it, and he could not. Because once you've sold something, it isn't yours anymore, and the people who own it get to decide whether it's a beloved institution to be protected or a balance sheet to be exploited. The Blakes chose the first, for 44 years. Everyone who came after chose the second, for the 40 years it took to grind 850 restaurants down to 100. The most impossible rise and fall of an American ice cream empire, and the impossible part isn't really the rise or even the fall on their own. The impossible, almost unbearable part is that the man who built it was still alive to watch the whole thing come apart, still sharp, still fighting, still writing that the most important thing is honesty, while the empire he'd built on honesty and thrift and warmth was taken apart, board by people who had none of those things and didn't need them because they didn't love it. They just owned it. Somewhere in New England tonight, in one of the 100 that are left, a kid is drinking a Fribble for the first time, in a red booth, under the same name two brothers chose in 1935 because they wanted people to feel welcome. And the Fribble is good. The ice cream is still good. It was always good. The ice cream was never the problem. The problem was that the people who inherited the empire forgot the two things the men who built it never did. Keep the promise simple, and never, ever bet the whole thing on money you don't have. The Blakes knew that in 1935, with 500 borrowed dollars and a used Ford between them, everyone who came after had every advantage those two boys never did, and lost the empire anyway because they had the restaurants and the plants and the brand and the debt, But they never had the one thing that actually built the place, which was two brothers who would rather close the doors than break a promise. Awful big, awful good, awfully avoidably gone.